Since he crossed the personal line, he's not gonna have my respect. He's not gonna have my team's respect. All I'm gonna need is 2 minutes in the octagon with you. Then I'm gonna put you to sleep in front of your whole family, your country, in front of everyone. My name is Ilia Topuria. I'm a professional athlete. And I'm the best. I'm the best fighter in the world.
Ilia Topuria just shocked the world by announcing his retirement from the UFC. Not after a long, grinding career. Not because his body finally broke down, but after a single loss, his very first defeat ever. And the way it all went down, the build-up, the stage, the man who beat him, what Topuria said right after. This is the kind of story that only happens in combat sports. The kind no writer could make up. 18 months ago, this man looked untouchable, unbeaten. 2 belts to his name. He'd already stopped Alexander Volkanovski twice, then moved up a weight class and dismantled Max Holloway. He wasn't just a champion anymore. People were putting his name alongside the greatest fighters this sport has ever seen. He walked into fight night with so much swagger, he built a coffin for his opponent, placed a white rose on top, showed up to the final press conference, pushed Gaethje on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in front of the entire world, and told everyone the ending was already decided. He got knocked out cold in front of Donald Trump, and 3 days later, at just 28 years old, he walked away with 1 loss on his record. Gone. This is the full story of how the most confident man in MMA wrote his own ending without even realizing it, and what he said once it was all over.
Go for the win, and I think that was the choice he had to make because it was going to continue to get worse. I beat his ass in the first round. Like, it might have been close on the scorecards. I absolutely took the first round, but the amount of damage that I inflicted in the first round set up the rest of the fight.
You need to understand what UFC 317 actually represented before we get into what went down inside that cage. This wasn't some ordinary title defense. This wasn't a routine main event. This was the UFC building a massive championship event at a location chosen, specifically for its political and historical significance. With a sitting president in the crowd and the whole world watching, Topuria walked in at 17-0. He hadn't just claimed the featherweight crown. He'd stopped Alexander Volkanovski, one of the greatest featherweights the sport has ever seen, twice in a row. He then jumped up to lightweight, taken Max Holloway's title too, and came back down to featherweight still holding both belts. He was performing at a level that made experts genuinely struggle to describe it, because the usual words just didn't feel big enough. Gaethje was the mandatory challenger, a former interim lightweight champion who'd been in the cage with Khabib Nurmagomedov, Tony Ferguson, Charles Oliveira, and Dustin Poirier. A man who'd been stopped before and stopped others at the highest level, but almost nobody gave him a real chance. The betting odds showed it. The commentary leading up to it showed it. Even casual fans treated it like a question of when Topuria would finish him, not if. That's the setup for everything that follows, how this fight was built, and how nasty it got before the opening bell. The bad blood between Topuria and Gaethje wasn't created by some marketing team. It was genuine, it was personal, and it grew worse with every public appearance they shared. It kicked off at the initial kickoff press conference a month before fight night. Topuria and Gaethje were already going at it. Sharp words flying, the room instantly tense. But Gaethje pushed it into personal territory fast. He called Topuria a gimmick publicly. Not a fighter, not a champion, a gimmick. A show, something built for the cameras instead of the cage. Then, completely unprompted, Gaethje brought up Topuria's divorce. In front of cameras and journalists, he said, word for word, "I understand why anybody would leave him." That was the exact moment this rivalry shifted from tense to genuinely ugly. Topuria didn't respond with words. He responded with that coffin stunt. A staged funeral, a white rose placed on a box carrying Gaethje's image, designed purely to embarrass him. The message was obvious. This isn't a competition. This is an ending. And I'm the one holding the flower. Everything boiled over at the final pre-fight press conference held on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Just the location alone should have signaled everyone wanted this to feel like a historic moment. Nobody expected it to turn into chaos. During the stare-down, Topuria shoved Gaethje. Not a light touch, a real shove, visible enough that Dana White's reaction on camera was instant shock. The UFC had poured serious resources into setting up a high-profile event at a national monument, and their own champion was shoving his opponent in front of everybody. Gaethje, to his credit, didn't escalate things physically, but he didn't stay silent either. He looked out at the view, the Lincoln Memorial behind them, the National Mall stretching out, and said, "Look at this beautiful view, and you want to act like an animal." He called Topuria an emotional little animal. Topuria later defended his actions. He said he'd warned Gaethje to back off when Gaethje basically dared him to swing. Topuria made a calculated move. A real punch could have gotten Gaethje pulled from the fight by the commission. A shove wouldn't, so that's what he did. Whether you call that restraint or provocation depends entirely on which fighter you're backing. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more chaotic, heavyweight Josh Hockett, who wasn't even fighting on that part of the card, used the shared spotlight to take a jab at Topuria's height. Standing right next to him, Hockett joked that Topuria was so short he can't even see himself in the bathroom mirror.
Because he's so short he can't see himself in the bathroom mirror, and he married a stripper from Miami. I'm sorry. The Incredible Hoagie.
The crowd ate it up. Topuria didn't. By the time fight night rolled around, Ilia Topuria had spent weeks telling everyone Justin Gaethje was already finished. He'd had a coffin built. He'd laid flowers on it. He'd shoved his opponent at a national landmark. He'd absorbed every insult, every personal dig, every joke about his height, and turned all of it into pure certainty that Saturday night would end with Gaethje's career destroyed. He had never felt more confident in his entire career. The opening round was misleading in the worst way for Topuria. He came out moving smoothly, controlling distance, looking calm. The way champions look when they already believe they've won. Gaethje stayed careful, testing things out, refusing to rush. Those early exchanges showed exactly how Topuria wanted this fight to unfold. Controlled pressure, sharp counters, the same calculated aggression that had torn through world-class fighters before him. And for parts of that first round, it was working. Topuria landed clean shots. He looked quick. He looked dangerous. He looked exactly like the fighter everyone expected. Here's the turning point of the entire fight. Halfway through round 2, Gaethje landed a right hand that snapped Topuria's head backward. Not a fight-ending shot, not something that stopped the action, but it was the first moment all night Topuria looked genuinely rattled. And more importantly, it told Gaethje something nobody else had picked up on yet. Topuria could be hit tonight, more than he'd ever been hit in any previous title defense. Gaethje, a fighter who built his entire career on absorbing damage and pushing forward anyway, didn't let that information go to waste. The damage built up quietly, then all at once. Topuria was landing shots, but so was Gaethje. And while Topuria was used to opponents breaking down under his pressure, Gaethje wasn't breaking. He was reading. He was waiting for the right opening, and it showed up late in round 2. Topuria committed to a combination, the same kind of aggressive sequence he'd used to finish fighters his whole career. Gaethje read the timing perfectly. He stepped in behind a straight right hand that landed clean on the chin, and Topuria collapsed. Not a stumble, not a knee touch. He went straight down. The referee waved it off seconds later. No chance to recover. No dramatic scramble to the cage wall. Ilia Topuria, 17-0, the unbeaten two-division champion, was knocked out cold in front of a sitting U.S. president and thousands of fans who genuinely thought they were about to witness a coronation. Justin Gaethje had just ended one of the most dominant championship runs the UFC has ever seen. Now here's where this story gets far more complicated than anyone expected. Not just the loss itself, fighters process losses all the time. Something far more permanent. 3 days after the fight, Topuria broke his silence. Not through a press release, not through his team. He went straight to his own platform, straight to his fans, and said exactly what was on his mind. He said, "I came into this sport to prove something. I've proved it, and I'm not willing to give this sport a version of me that's chasing ghosts." Sit with that for a second. He wasn't setting up a rematch. He wasn't asking for a redemption run. He was announcing his retirement from the UFC at 28 years old, with a record of 17-1, right after his first professional loss, on the biggest stage the sport has. The MMA world froze, because this isn't how the story is supposed to play out. The blueprint every combat sports story follows is simple. The unbeaten champion loses, goes through a public moment of reflection, rebuilds, and comes back. The narrative demands it. The fans expect it. The money demands it. Even the fighter's own pride usually demands it. Topuria threw that blueprint out. And what makes this announcement hit even harder than anything he said before the fight is what he left out. He didn't blame Gaethje. He didn't mention a rematch. He didn't claim he got robbed. He didn't make excuses. He simply said the version of him that needed to fight was the version chasing proof, and that version, in his own words, doesn't exist anymore. That's either the most self-aware thing a fighter has said after a brutal knockout, or it's raw emotion talking right after one of the most humbling nights of his life. Maybe both. Probably both. Reactions came in fast from every direction. Gaethje, asked about the retirement news, was blunt as always. He said, "If that's really what he wants, I respect it, but I think he'll change his mind once the adrenaline fades and that belt starts calling his name." That single line basically sums up this entire rivalry. Even standing in victory, Gaethje isn't celebrating. Topuria's own camp has stayed surprisingly quiet, and that says a lot. Leading up to the fight, his team was loud, confident, constantly feeding the media. The silence after the retirement announcement speaks louder than anything they said during fight week. Here's something worth understanding about Topuria's record heading into that fight. He'd finished every single opponent in the UFC, 14 fights straight. Think about that. Not one of those men made it to a decision. Not one outlasted him. That kind of finishing rate doesn't exist at lightweight or featherweight. It barely exists in any division at any level. That's a stat that stays in the record books no matter how this story ends. And still, none of those finishes prepared him for what Gaethje brought into that cage that night. What you actually watched on fight night wasn't an upset, wasn't a fluke, wasn't just a bad night for a great champion. What you watched was the oldest story in combat sports wearing a new disguise. The easy explanation is that Topuria got overconfident, got caught up playing the villain, got lost in the coffin stunt and the Lincoln Memorial chaos and all the trash talk, and walked in mentally distracted against a guy with nothing to lose and everything to gain. But here's what was really going on. Gaethje had been building this exact performance for months, not just physically training but studying. He knew how Topuria loaded up his combinations. He knew when he committed. Every bit of trash talk Topuria threw out was information. It told Gaethje exactly how emotional Topuria really was, exactly how personally invested he'd become in playing the unbeatable villain. And fighters who get that emotionally invested make split-second decisions driven by ego instead of strategy. They overcommit. They chase the finish one beat too soon. They confuse aggression with control. Gaethje, the man nobody believed in, the man Topuria basically buried in a coffin, walked into that cage calmer and sharper than anyone gave him credit for. That white rose Topuria placed on the casket ended up revealing more about his own mental state than anything about Gaethje's weaknesses, and Gaethje knew it. He used it against him. That's not luck. That's the most underrated skill in this sport, making your opponent perform instead of compete. So where does Ilia Topuria go from here? If this retirement sticks, it's one of the most jaw-dropping exits in UFC history. A 28-year-old two-division champion walking away after his first loss, with no rematch clause used, no public meltdown, none of the usual "I'll be back stronger" talk. If he's serious, he joins a very short list of fighters who walked away before the sport could finish them off. A list almost every fighter wishes they belonged to, but almost none ever actually reach. The other outcome is just as obvious and has happened before. Fighters claim they're done right after devastating losses all the time. The emotion is genuine in that moment. The intention is genuine too. Then 6 months go by. The body recovers, the ego resets, and the offers start coming in with numbers that make a rematch feel inevitable instead of desperate. Gaethje now holds the belt, the same belt Topuria built his whole identity around, the one he was supposed to defend in front of us. There's also a third angle nobody's really talking about, and it matters. Topuria has never been in this spot before. He's never had to bounce back from anything. Every setback in his career happened before the UFC, before the title, before cameras turned every moment into something permanent. His entire brand was built on the idea that he couldn't be beaten. Nobody, not even him, knows what version of Ilia Topuria shows up after a knockout loss like this. That path he chooses next, retirement or return. He won't settle for any ending that isn't written coffin he built for Gaethje. The one with the white rose meant to symbolize an ending, turned out to be for the wrong man. Whatever comes next for Topuria is going to take longer than he wants, longer than his ego is ready to accept. And it's far less predictable than anything he planned heading into that fight week. But everything he's ever accomplished in this sport came the hard way, the defiant way, the way that demanded the world doubt him first. and whatever entirely on his own terms. The only real question left is whether those terms still include stepping back into the cage. This video is created strictly for sports commentary, analysis, and educational purposes to keep our audience updated on the latest combat sports news. All content, including commentary and visuals, has been recreated and enhanced with the help of AI technology to make this video more unique, engaging, and informative for our viewers. No official UFC broadcast footage, copyrighted material, or trademarked content is used in this video. All opinions shared are based on publicly available information and are intended for fair use under commentary, criticism, and educational analysis. This content does not represent the official statements of any fighter, promotion, or organization mentioned, and is made purely to inform and entertain our combat sports audience.